So as a little girl growing up, there were lessons. Lessons learned that I guess should never be learned, let alone taught. As children grow, they learn to crawl, walk, and run. By the time they begin school, they have learned their ABCs, how to count from 1 to 3, draw, paint, dream, and laugh. In school, they make new friends, try new sports, learn new skills, and become wise in mathematics, English, science, and other studies that pique their curious interests and minds. They learn lessons that set them up to live a well-adjusted, happy, safe, amazing life that gives them multitudes of choices from universities, careers, relationships, and most importantly, we hope sets them up to always have the ability to make informed choices, decisions about their futures and their lives. But for a small, petite coloured child who was adopted to her British grandmother, this child would grow up learning lessons that no child should ever have to learn. This small, coloured, petite child who was way too small for her age, who wore clothes that were way too big and shoes that fell off her small feet, whose hair was dark and long, and whose dark brown eyes were filled with pain, sadness, and tears, and whose heart was already heavy at her young age of 5. Her light already dimmed. This little girl was learning lessons about how to survive from the tormentors in the schoolyard who shouted across the playgrounds, "Look, there's the dirty girl. Do you think she ever washes? Why do you think her clothes look like that? Did your mum get them out of the bin?" And then they would run away laughing, leaving this little girl to disappear into her make-believe world as she tried to shut out the terrifying noise. This little girl had already learned that men like to play with her and not in a healthy way. She had already learned the meaning of feeling alone, lost, and abandoned. She had already learned that no one would protect her or comfort her. She already had learned that she was different from the others, and not in a good way, but in a way that would make any nurturing, loving, protective mother's heart break. While other children played, she learned to disconnect. She would look up into the sky with tears in her eyes, and she would ask the question, why me? As the sky stayed quiet, the little girl learned to believe her differences, the colour of her skin, the violence she experienced was because she was unworthy, a rotten egg, a mistake, defected, that somehow this was her punishment for being a mistake. With no one to teach her differently, with no one to show her another way, with no one to nurture or love her for her uniqueness and gifts, she would dream of being born white like the other children in the playground. She would dream that she wore pretty dresses, shoes that fit, and she would dream that she belonged, that she had a family who loved her unconditionally, completely, a family who protected her from the bad men, protected her from the bullies, and protected her from the boys who would pull her pants down because they wanted to see if her private parts were coloured pink or white. The small coloured petite child was learning to disconnect, was learning that she was worthless, that she wouldn't amount to much, and that her life would never be hers, but that her life would always belong to the monsters who abused, bullied, and tormented her. It wouldn't be long before the years had passed and the small young girl would now be a young woman. She had already been sexually abused so many times she had lost count. She'd been sexually, emotionally, and physically abused so much that she now just expected it from every person that she met. She expected it from the leaders in her family's church, her family, the babysitters' husbands, and the few friends she had, well, their fathers too. Sadly, her story of tragedy was only beginning, and as she attempted to end her life and her pain, she would find herself in and out of mental institutions for the majority of her teenage years and well into young adulthood. As she would wake from her tents and look around her empty hospital room, there would be no one there, and the feelings of loneliness would be more rampant now than ever. For somewhere deep inside, she still hoped that someone would be there telling her that she was loved, that she was worthy, and that she was meant to be. But with every attempt to escape the loneliness, those rooms filled with loser, would just get louder and more unbearable to hear. It wasn't long before she met a young man whom she hoped she would finally be able to fill a void, where she hoped she would find love, protection, family, safety, and a place where she belonged. But here she would find herself pregnant, being beaten, abused in ways she thought were long gone, and this relationship would be a constant reminder of all those years gone by where she felt like she was a mistake. This relationship confirming what she had already felt she knew. When her baby girl was only 6 weeks old, she fled the country to return home to where she was born, New Zealand. Having left New Zealand with an adopted family to move to Western Australia when she was 16, her life had gone from tragedy to tormented. Now being back in the country she loved, she would face more battles. Her adopted family taking her baby because she was white, fair, blue-eyed, with blonde curls that were a stark contrast to her coloured mum. Being single and already defected, her adopted family would take her baby girl to give to an aunt who had lost their son to suicide. The young woman's family telling her she would never be a good mum, that she couldn't raise a white baby, that this baby was never meant to be for her, but for her aunt. And if she wanted any good to come of her life, she would give her to them. So with tears in her eyes and her heart heavy, she gave up, knowing that really she didn't have a chance. She didn't have a chance against her family, who were the constant reminder that she was a mistake and defected, different, a no-hoper, a loser, worthless, someone who would never amount to anything in her life. With the ministers from the cult she was raised in, to her adopted mum and family, they took her baby and they left without a doubt. It was only a matter of time before the world of exploitation, rape, and violence would become her new home. Already with feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, this world would swallow her whole. Instead of being afraid and cautious, she was strangely felt like she was home. Here she was offered all those things she yearned for as a young coloured girl. Even though they controlled her, they protected her. Even though they took her money, they looked after her. Even though they beat her, they provided her a home. Even though they sold her, they gave her somewhere to belong. Even though they raped her, they told her she was beautiful. And even though there were the ones who broke her, there were the ones who would hold her. Even though she cried oceans of tears and her heart broke endlessly every day, there was one who called her his, and she would try to please him every moment of every day. This was her life. And even though the torment was real, and even though she was in pain every day, she finally believed in hell and realized that her family and those bullies were right. She was exactly where she belonged and where she was meant to be. A place that put in perspective her unanswered questions of why me? The belly of the underworld, the answer she had been longing for, seeking her entire young life. And it would be many, many years before a light would begin to burn, where a seed would be planted, gifting her hope, and many years before that seed would take hold and grow. At 40 years of age, as I stood in front of a mirror and I saw this little girl staring back at me, this little girl that was once full of questions, sass, dreams, and excitement before the tormentors took hold. This little girl whose eyes stared straight into mine, piercing my soul with a light that shook me to my core. This little girl staring back at me was me. Inside her journey, I soon realized the lessons that I had learned. As a young coloured girl already, I was at a disadvantage and would have to fight harder to thrive and survive. Growing up in poverty, isolated and in despair, I was already disadvantaged to live a life free from fear. As a coloured disadvantaged young girl, I was already vulnerable and an easy target for predators, abusers, and tormentors. As a young coloured disadvantaged woman with no friends or support, a young woman who trusted no one and who'd never experienced love, I was easy prey for the pimps and the Johns of the underworld who knew all they needed to offer was somewhere to belong. As a young mum who already learnt to disconnect, who had zero self-worth and thought herself as ugly, faulty, and a mistake, I was an easy target for those charming narcissists who dressed up as saviors, princes, and knights. With my baby boy cradled in my arms and my other children running around the yard, I knew that something needed to change. Somewhere I asked myself, surely if I was still here, despite everything I had thought, experienced, and lived, there had to be something more. Surely at least my children deserved more. In this moment, as I thought of them, I remembered the promise that I had made years before as I lay dying and seeing myself from another world. I became determined that my story would not be one of tragedy and despair, but somehow that it would gift hope, freedom, and save another from ever having to endure and carry the pain and despair that I wore. So one cold winter's evening, after my baby's boy's dad had kicked my young daughter in the side of the head with a steel-cut fruit because she wouldn't surrender to his unwanted advances, I grabbed my children and we all walked out that door. This would be the defining moment of my life that would see me begin to walk down a path I never dreamed I would walk. I was determined to help women who were survivors of domestic violence, determined to create awareness around the men who hid behind their debonaires and charm. A friend asked me to cover a domestic violence rally, and it would be here that I would first hear an incredible woman speaking about her life in prostitution. And I remember thinking to myself, what? This is domestic violence? Why is she speaking about prostitution? As I listened intently with curiosity, a light went off inside my mind when I had realized that being in prostitution was never a choice, but something I had almost become groomed to endure. Through years of sexual, physical, mental, and emotional abuse, I had been exploited for all my vulnerabilities and tragedies that have brought me here. As I shared with her my story, it would not be long before I was standing in front of a crowd of people, speaking out about my own journey in prostitution and how I found myself there. I remember saying that I had no agenda for being there, no political, not religious. I was there purely to share my story and the hopes that it would gift another life. I often look back at that moment and the path that took me to be here with you all today. It has been a path of ups and downs and curves and tunnels and hills and mountains, and sometimes roads that have only led to dead ends. But one thing I'm sure of is that we are all meant to be here. No matter what we have gone through or we have endured, no matter what another has inflicted on us, no matter what pain we have felt, we are all worthy to live a life free from fear. I have realized that how I live from this moment on is up to me. I have the courage to choose the pathways that I walk, and I have the power to design a life that I choose to love. For years, I let my family and abusive men feed off my pain, sorrow, and my soul, but no more. They no longer control who I am, who I was born to be, or who I choose to be. I freed myself from their power by letting go of the childhood that I wished for and embraced and started being grateful for what I have now. You see, while I lived and focused on what had been stolen from me, I let my abusers continually have hold of me. By letting go of what was, I took back my power and my freedom for what is. This is my power, and I choose to use my story to give hope, freedom, and courage. As they try to hold me down with their voices still ringing in my ears, I learn to quieten them, but not silence them. For now, I gratefully receive their words as they become reminders for why I now do what I do, and that is to be a voice for the voiceless, being a light that shines so bright that those living in darkness who are lost can find their way out. As women come together, uniting stronger than ever, as we link arms and fight for the rights of those who have lost their fight to live, we create a movement so strong that together we become the brightest stars in the night sky, leading the way to hope, freedom, leading the way to a better future for our children and our grandchildren. But most importantly, we leave a legacy that we never gave up, that we fought together, and that despite our differences, we unite together with courage, grit, authenticity, integrity for a common cause, and that's to protect the rights of women and children, to show the world that women and children deserve more from life than to be bought, sold, abused, violated, and controlled. Together, united, we will gift hope and freedom for all. Thank you.